Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Legal 500 webinar on Ecuador, sponsored by local firm Tobar ZBS. Firstly, thanks to everyone who has logged in to join us this morning. Just for the sake of clarification, the discussion is due to run for approximately 60 or 70 minutes, leaving us around 20 minutes for a Q&A. Please feel free to send in questions during the course of the discussion using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please, not the chat button, and keeping them as concise as possible. Thank you. So, following on from the electoral win and recent inauguration of Guillermo Lasso's centre-right pro-business administration, we'll be asking if the stars are aligning for Ecuador's growth. With us to discuss the question, we have 5 speakers, each eminent in their respective fields. Before I turn to them, however, just a few initial points, if I may. The new administration, inaugurated last month, comes to power in the wake of an almost 8% contraction in the country's economy as a result of the pandemic. And while the central bank foresees growth of between 2.8 and 3.1% this year, the urgency of tax reform to improve public finances is perhaps only equaled by how inopportune politically and socially such a measure would be as the country seeks to get back on its feet. One only need to look to neighboring Colombia, where Duque's tax reform and its reception remain fresh in the memory. The arithmetic in Congress is equally significant. The administration has just 8 seats out of a total of 137. Suffice to say, there will have to be compromises. We should perhaps also take note of the electorate that brought Lasso to power, in what to many was a surprise result, and of which some 60% were under 30 years of age. As political commentator Daniel Zavato has noted, this is a segment that is frequently better educated than its parents' generation and that is looking for opportunities in a future, but which currently face greater job insecurity and lack of opportunities than previous generations. Lasso's investiture speech, in turn, gave an indication of the direction in which the administration wishes to move, seeking full membership of the Alianza del Pacífico, for example, and free trade agreements with major trading partners, starting with the US. He also noted the potential role of tech development and the importance of the local business and investment communities getting on board with the administration's aims. So, with that said, perhaps I can turn first to Bernardo Tobar. Bernardo is the managing partner of Tobar ZVS, a long-standing member of the Ecuadorian legal market and our sponsors today. With some 30 years legal experience, both in private practice and in-house, Bernardo is a corporate specialist, a long-standing advocate of IP rights and technological innovation, as well as the author of El Mito del Leviatán. What then, Bernardo, is your reading of where the country finds itself at this juncture? And what are the critical factors that need to align if the country is to significantly enhance its economic position? What is the role of the private sector in embedding growth that is sustainable during the course of this administration?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
I want to start by thanking everyone in the panel. They are the best of breed in each of their fields, so I appreciate a lot they're taking the time to share their knowledge and experience with us today. And I thank you everyone for joining on this discussion. And you know, more than answers, I will try to play the role of a provoker. And we'll start by setting some context on this. You know, I think everyone is aware that after many years of authoritarian ruling and what I would call freedom allergic laws and policies, Ecuador has the opportunity of becoming the next investment frontier. But there are many examples in the region of liberal political windows that were wasted by government leaders and business elites alike, resulting in a return to statism reloaded. Case in point, Argentina after Macri. You know, Chile's market-friendly president Piñera had to compromise and open the way to a constitutional reform process that follows the so-called Puebla Group playbook, formerly the Sao Paulo Forum. And it doesn't take a mysterious future prediction talent to figure out how that process might end. Colombia is facing the same pressures Chile and Ecuador did. Peru's elected president drove its local currency to historical lows, and the country risk is surging. And there's Bolivia, Venezuela, and analysts are saying that Lula da Silva, the leftist Brazilian politician, might have a shot at Bolsonaro in the presidential elections next year. So, one of my key context points is that business and corporate leaders do have a role to play, and do have a preeminent role to play in the coming years. In today's highly interconnected world, what business leaders and corporations do or tweet may have a larger impact than presidential decrees. So my first point of question is, what should the business leaders do in order to rise to this historical challenge? And let me add to this some non-political context. Let's turn off the political noise and take a look at what's going on actually in the world. Because of the exponential curve in technological development, what the experts call the Moore's law, powered by increasing connectivity and ever expanding computational power, the world is experiencing unprecedented technological advancements. From genetically engineering that cures illnesses by fixing coding errors in the DNA sequence, self-driving cars and aircrafts, 3D printing that will transform the entire supply chain as we know it. Currencies enabled by blockchain technologies. And this is a topic that I like pretty much. It fascinates me how, technology has enabled the market to come up with something that everyone would have thought was reserved to government sovereignty. That is the creation of currency. And there we are back to what happened historically. Historically, currencies were created by free market forces. And later in the day, governments started to take a role in that. And these blockchain technologies are gonna power self-executing or smart contracts, are gonna be the platform where real estate transactions take place. We're gonna have digital IDs and passports, even law creation and more. Add to this mix, artificial intelligence that has become ubiquitous, edge computing, extracting concepts from complex legal documents to issuing dispute resolution rulings. In the European Union, there is a case study of an artificial intelligence fed with nearly 500 cases. And except for 3, the resolution issued by the AI was in the substantial aspects very similar to the decisions issued by the human members of the court. Clean energy technologies that are resolving challenges that regulators and diplomats discussing climate change have miserably failed to address properly. And this is real at commercial scale. It's all these technologies are there. Probably some of those technologies weren't here available 5 years or 10 years ago, but now they are a reality. And around the corner, we have an array of technologies that will empower the human race to set foot in other planets. And I want to stress something. This is not the future. This is happening now. So in this context, what are the game-changing initiatives that entrepreneurs should be looking into in order to surf the wave and not be buried by the tsunami? And I will turn this to Michelle. And I just want to leave you with some, highlights on what I think should be expected. First, I think it's a culture of thinking big. New technologies require vision and courage, not territory, not military might or government subsidies. It requires an innovation mindset. a try, fail, and iterate attitude, an appetite for new frontiers that is not hindered primarily by mental or imaginary barriers. Second, digital transformation. I do think that companies that are not technology companies won't be companies at all in the future. You know, corporate policies aimed at fairly distributing to all stakeholders the benefit of growth. We have discussed, and I think this is one of the pressing issues, that if the growth that the business community and the government working hand by hand may bring about in the next 4 years is not felt throughout all the segments of society, we might be losing the chance to set the foundations for a lasting transformation in Ecuador. And finally, I would say communication, playing an active role in cultural change. You know, education, while indispensable, doesn't necessarily change the mindset. We have lots of PhDs filling the ranks of socialist governments. So I think we need to work on a cultural mindset change. And that's something where corporations have a primary role to play.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bernardo. Well, as he has suggested, Michelle, perhaps I can bring you in at this point. Can I just introduce Michel Della? He's the president of major Ecuadorian holding group, Grupo Della, with holdings in and activities from construction, real estate, retail, mining, entertainment. Michel, in some ways, consortium built on literally in bricks and mortar. Can I ask for your sort of responses and thoughts to Bernardo's radical, in some ways, but radically present in terms of our capabilities, suggestions for the country's next transformation and movement forwards?
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much to all the people that are listening. Welcome to a seminar that gives you a view of the opportunity of Ecuador. And maybe before I answer Bernardo, I would just like to, because I agree with most of the things he said. Of course, we're close friends and we've been speaking about this for years, and the role that business people have to take in terms of being difference makers in the future of the country, not only as economic actors, but also as political and involved people. For all of you who have not been in Ecuador, I put in the background of a picture that I had 2 weeks ago. It's going down the Andes towards the coast of Ecuador, and it shows you the beauty and the richness of our country. It's a strategically located country. We cannot start any conversation about Ecuador without understanding that being located on the equator, having the Pacific Ocean with the current of Humboldt and the Corriente del Niño, having the Galapagos Islands and the rainforest, the Amazon actually starts off the highlands of Ecuador, and having this wealth of natural resources makes us a unique country. And we need to take advantage of that. That is our country's incredibly rich in terms of natural resources. Our biodiversity is unique. Per square meter, we have more biodiversity than any other country in the world. Yes, I am in love with my country, in this spectacular country to come visit, to live, and to invest in. We were living in truly uncertain times, very difficult times, very scary times, because all this communication and all the amount of information the world has broken a lot of molds, and there's a lot of people that have been left out of the economy and left out of opportunity that today are requiring to be part of the system, that want to be part of the system, and they don't have that opportunity. And after COVID, the amount of poverty that has been increased in the world is a very, very difficult situation for every country, for a country like Ecuador, about 15% of the population diminished economic classes. If somebody was middle income, became lower middle income. If it was lower middle income, became poor, et cetera, et cetera. And this is compounded by very strong political movements that are trying to take advantage of, unfortunately, failed economic systems that are in fashion in South America. And within this context is an island today where you have Ecuador as the only country basically that has a president who's a banker, who 15 years ago decided to separate himself from the bank and dedicate the rest of his life to try to make a difference in the country, going through very hard and difficult moments. And most of the time looking at, as being accused of being a banker, which is almost a bad word in terms of politics. Unfortunately, that's not right, but it's really true. And he was able to win the election, partially because people were really tired of the previous socialistic of the 21st century system that we had with the Correa government. And they want to change and they want a different opportunity. And because they saw in him somebody who was successful in his field and would hope that he can apply his philosophy, his vision, his skills, end corruption, lower corruption into Ecuador. And within that context, we have this great opportunity, like Bernardo says. We have 4 years. We have 4 years to change the country and to become an example in South America. And we have a very uphill battle. I'll be very honest, in the sense that there's a lot of things to be changed. We have to diminish corruption, as that is one of the biggest problems in all of South America. Make it much more friendly for investment, for international investment. Ecuador is a country that has about 4.5% of its PIB in foreign investment, compared to Colombia and Peru that has 3.5 to 5%, depending on the year and depending on the country, just taking Colombia and Peru as an example. And so there's immense opportunities to bring investments into Ecuador. And I shouldn't be telling you all of this because it's our advantage, the ones that we are here, because we have very high returns. And we have one tremendous opportunity, advantage to every other country in South America. And it's something that needs to be very, very carefully understood. And we're a dollar-based economy. We're 100% dollar-based economy. I know so many companies that do business in Colombia and Peru and Chile and Argentina, and they had a good year. And by the time they wanted to transfer the money back to either euros or dollars, they ended up losing money because of the devaluation. By having such a strong currency, which also has some disadvantages. And we have such stabilities that the profits that are generated in Ecuador are in hard currency, and it just gives a sense of stability that is an incredible opportunity for investors. The opportunities in Ecuador are everywhere. This country needs to be developed. We have to develop fishing, tourism, agro-industry, infrastructure, tourism, mining, oil, and then value-added businesses. Everything can be done in Ecuador, and most people that work in Ecuador are very happy and do very well. And last, which I think is very important to understand for all of you that have followed South America, you will see that Ecuador is an island today of opportunity, but it's also an island of peace. It's a country that hasn't had the problems that we've had in the northern with Colombia with the FARC, or in the south with Sendero Luminoso. We are a very peaceful people. We are very, every one of our countries are different and they have advantages, disadvantages, but Ecuadorians in general are people that want peace, quiet, and they want prosperity. So the opportunity is there. It's a great, great opportunity. And this is probably one of the best kept secrets in terms of the people that believe in free markets and in democracy. Ecuador becomes the defender and the pillar today in South America. So it's also important to defend that, because at the end, this is also a war between two systems. Whether we fight for free market, transparency, democracy, or we develop leftist models that defend other things, including some things that are very concerning, like narco-terrorism and things like that. So this is a big bet, and it's a bet that Ecuador has to be successful. And we are, the southern part of the United States. We are the ideal strategic partners for the US. And just like Europe has to look at us because of what we defend, and has to look at Africa, the world has to look at us today. So
Thanks.
that's it.
Thank you very much, Michel. There's a lot of interesting points in what you've had to say, and I'd like to come back to you later on the possible sort of exploitation of that, environmental diversity that you've mentioned, because it seems that there's an enormous potential there. Just before we move on, and thinking about these business community groups that are seeking to sort of support LASO and move towards greater growth in the country. Can you tell us anything about any of these groups? I'm thinking perhaps of the Alianza para el Emprendimiento y Innovación. I don't know if you're part of that initiative, but I know there are some groups sort of actively looking at ways to sort of, move the economy on in the wake of the pandemic.
So was that to me?
I'm sorry, Michel, my apologies. I was just interested in whether you had participation in any of these groups, such as Alianza para el Emprendimiento y Innovación.
Yeah. Well, it's an organization that was started by Ecuadorian people. We are partners in it. It's doing great jobs in terms of looking at opportunities in every one of the in every one of the fields that I've told you. And for instance, let me give you an example that I think it's worth to understand where value added is. As an example, Ecuador has always been the #1 producer of fine quality, fine aroma cacao in the world. If you take Belgian chocolate or Swiss chocolate or French chocolate, and you look at the ingredients, you will see that it's Ecuadorian cacao mostly. Well, through the last couple of years, now we're starting to produce some of the best chocolate in the whole world. Some of these companies have been funded and supported by AEI. And that's just an example of where we're starting to generate value added and taking opportunity. And if all of you who are listening to the seminar, Google the top 10 chocolates in the world, you're going to find that I think we have 2 brands in it. I think Pacari is one of them, and another one is República del Cacao, as the winners of the best chocolates in the world, just as an example of how much can be done.
Excellent, Michel. Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, I believe that Speaker Thais Garcia from Clifford Chance is having a few difficulties with connection right now. So I'm going to pass on and move directly to our colleague, Rocio Velade. Rocio Velade has been with Citibank for some 20 years, including almost a decade in Brazil before arriving in Quito as CCO of the bank in 2019. Rocio, as a representative of the financial sector, let's talk hard money. Let's bring Bernardo and Michel's comments down to what do you see as the key factors that are going to facilitate the attraction of FDI into Ecuador in this 4-year administration? How do we move beyond just what we hope to see as inflows from multilaterals into private equity, venture capital, and other sources of income for the country? What are the necessary steps here, please?
Thank you, Tim. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Bernardo, for kindly inviting me to be part of this STEAM group of colleagues. Tim, I'm not going to be less optimistic than Michel. nor Bernardo. So I will start as a foreigner. I will start validating everything that Michelle and Bernardo said, right? So so let me start there. This is an amazing country which I've been privileged to be living in for the last 2 years. As you mentioned, I came from Brazil. Being here, I'm excited about the potential that Ecuador represents. The picture that you saw from Michel in his background is one of many pictures that you can take here in Ecuador that show the beauty and potential that you have here. So I had to start there because I have to subscribe to every comment that both Bernardo and Michelle said in terms of the ability of this country to be a beacon of light in terms of generating investment opportunities and the right type of investment opportunities, those that can have a positive and long-lasting impact, not only in companies, but also in the people, right? So sorry if I was not the hard bowler here, but that's a point that I thought was important to make. Having said that, when we get now to the nitty-gritty of what needs to be done, there's a very clear agenda that has been put forward by this administration in terms of what are the next steps to make Ecuador a magnet for investment. Let's call it that way, right? They are very mindful that at this point in time, doing business in Ecuador is not as nearly as easy as it is on our neighbor countries, and there's a lot of red tape that has to be removed first, and they do have an agenda to go about that. The other thing is to ensure that investors can trust the country and its rule of law, which is kind of, investment 101. If you want to attract the kind of productive investment that, and connecting a little bit to Bernardo's points on what the business leaders need to do in terms to take advantage of this opportunity that we have, is to make sure that we are able to attract investments that are mindful of the environment, that are mindful of the people, and that generate the right conditions for progress, looking into what's being called in the business world the 3 Ps, right? People, planet, and profit. And that's something that has to come first in the business leaders' agenda, and it has to come first when we look into which kind of investors we want to attract into the country, right? We need to make sure that investors that come into the country are mindful of respecting this pristine environment. You can see another picture there on Michelle's background. The environment has to be respected. It has to be being mindful of the communities. We do have a very diverse country here, and we have very diverse cultures that need to be understood and embedded into the investment decisions. They need to be listened to make sure that, again, this is sustainable, right? So rule of law is something that needs to be worked on and is being worked on by the current administration. The reconnection of the country with certain international arbitration institutions, I think it's a step in the right direction. More needs to be done, but this shows you a concrete step into the right direction, right? So I will stop there to see if this answers your question, team, and then we can go further into specifics.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rocio. I must admit, I totally agree on the red tape, but I thought you were also perhaps going to mention something along the lines of the central bank, because obviously that had problems of independence, especially during the previous administrations. Is that something that Citi as an institution is looking to see consolidated under this administration?
Sure, that's a very good point. As our audience may know, the previous administration entered into an agreement with the International Monetary Fund that had as one of its main deliverables or commitments to the International Monetary Fund to garner independence from the central bank to ensure that whatever it's entrusted to the Central Bank of Ecuador is managed independently by a board that makes the decisions on technical basis and not political basis. The Moreno administration was able to pass through the assembly the law, what they called of protection of the dollarization, which ensures independence of the central bank. Again, what it looks for is to give the central bank the technical tools to make its decision. As Michelle mentioned, we are a dollarized economy, so you do not have monetary policy, but still the central bank is entrusted with the international reserves of the country, its management, data reporting, data quality. So it's the main institution for making economic policy, right? So the information that they produce and the decisions that they make have to be made taking into consideration the prospects of the country in the long term. And that's something that we as an institution, and I would say the financial institutions industry as a whole needs to see consolidated, right? The regulation is there. It was approved by the assembly. We are seeing it being implemented. However, consistency and execution are important, and we are very mindful of that, and we are following that very closely. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much, Rocio. Thais, I'm delighted to welcome you from New York. Joining us from Clifford Chance, we have Latin America-focused corporate and transactional partner, Thais Garcia. Thank you very much, Thais. I'm going to jump you straight in at the deep end. And can I ask for your impressions here of the international perspective? We've been talking, as it were, domestically about how Ecuador itself sees its ability to bring in greater finance, etc. But from the international perspective, how do you see the prospect? Is the regional makeup of Latin America a factor that sort of throws the country into a good relief? Is this going to increase the profile of the country? What are your perspectives, please?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me well now?
We can indeed. Thank you.
Perfect. And apologies for the technical glitches. I guess that's what happens when one tries to do a proper VC from the office for the first time in a year. So apologies for that. There are a number of factors that make a country like Ecuador more or less attractive to foreign investment. And starting with the basics, economy and scale are key factors. As Michelle mentioned earlier, the fact that Ecuador has a dollarized economy certainly gives it an edge compared to other countries in the region, but having a dollarized economy in itself is not enough, right? Having a solid, steady, and reliable legal framework is really key in my mind, and that translates into four main factors. Number one, the rule of law and legal certainty, and Rocio just alluded to that. Investors want to know what the rules of the game are so that they can assess risk and determine the potential return on their investment. So the legal framework needs to be solid and clear, with no or little room for interpretation, and enforceable pursuant to its terms. Legal certainty is really key. Second, creating the right incentives to foster investment. And this is particularly important when a country is trying to attract foreign investment into new sectors where there is no solid track record. And one of the things that, in my opinion, Ecuador did in recent years that was well received by the investment community was to put in place a stimulus package to foster private investment, which includes, among other things, exemption from taxes on current remittances and exoneration from income tax for a certain period of time. And initially, these benefits would apply to investments made up until 2022. So it will be interesting to see if the new administration will extend them further. I think that the investment community will for sure appreciate it. The third factor, in my view, is legal stability. Investors not only need to know what the rules of the game and incentives are, but that such rules or incentives are not going to change or disappear halfway through the life cycle of an investment, right? And this is always a major concern for any investor in any country. But I'd say it's particularly relevant in the case of Ecuador, as the country denounced the majority of the bilateral investment treaties, the BITs, it had signed a couple of years ago. Ecuador did make a significant effort in recent years to mitigate this concern, at least partially, by entering into investment agreements with investors that include the legal stability clause, so ensuring that some of these incentives or benefits are not going to disappear overnight. And the country is also revisiting its policy as regards trade agreements and bilateral investment treaties. So, they're moving forward with the talks about the Pacific Alliance Free Trade Agreement. There are also talks about trade agreements with the US and talks about signing new BITs, including with the Netherlands. And we'll see what happens, but in my view, these are important steps. And last, I think investors want to know what happens if there is a dispute or a problem. Investors want certainty that there is a mechanism to resolve grievances that is efficient and that is fair. And one positive sign that the new administration gave to the international community in this respect recently was signing the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, the ECID Convention. This was a major policy reversal more than a decade after the state withdrew from the treaty. So to wrap up, creating the right incentives combined with a solid, stable, and reliable legal framework are really, in my view, the foundation for Ecuador to start attracting more investments, both on the equity and on the debt side, because equity and debt go hand in hand in that respect. And we've seen this movie before in Latin America, where sometimes governments put forward legal frameworks to foster investment in certain sectors with terms and conditions that are not bankable. And it's hard for an investor to commit equity if you can get financing because there's no appetite in the lending market, or if a given project is not bankable, even in a dollarized economy like Ecuador. So in my view, Ecuador is taking steps in the right direction. I tend to agree with my fellow panelists that there's a lot more to be done. We're starting to see more appetite from foreign investors to investing in Ecuador, and it's important to build momentum. And I hope that the new administration takes advantage of this opportunity to really show a firm commitment to continuing strengthening the investment climate, as this can be a turning point for the country.
Thank you very much indeed, Thais. That's a fascinating additions to what has already been said. I would like also now to turn to Hector Figari. Hector Figari is Head of Corporate, External and Legal Affairs South at Microsoft. As the infamous, famous company name Microsoft would suggest, you're going to pick up, I believe, Hector, on the tech angle. And if we can look to see how these, I'm very interested, obviously we know about the development of tech, but how that can prove to be sort of transformative for a country of this size, for an economy of this size. Is tech perhaps potentially even more effective and efficient for a country the size of Ecuador than it would be if we were trying to employ it or put something in place in a larger economy? I know that Microsoft has been working around the region on a number of different projects, as well as globally, that you've had some activities previously in Ecuador. So perhaps you could let us know a little bit about that, and then we can begin to bring all these strands together.
Thank you, Tim. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to all the people assisting this panel. I am really honored to be here with my fellow panelists, fine professionals in their areas. So yes, maybe I would like to follow up on something that Bernardo was describing, which is the tech environment right now with some numbers. And going with some numbers, it how from Microsoft we see the near future. And going on that, there are some interesting facts. For example, 30% of corporate audits we think will be made by artificial intelligence. Close to 10% of vehicles will be no driving, or vehicles that doesn't need a driver specifically. Approximately 1 trillion of sensors will be connected to the internet. 60% of future jobs will require some kind of technical abilities. We will begin to see the first robots, physical robots, because already we have bots attending or dealing with clients and public attention. So as we can see, and as Bernardo said, this is not the future, this is what is happening right now. And technology, because of this, right now is transversal to all of the activities. There is not tech company outside of other not tech company. All the tech companies right now are tech companies. All companies right now are dealing a lot with data, with information, and information right now is more valuable than at any point in the human history. So because of this, what needs a country as Ecuador in order to take this wave and to take advantage of this trend right now? As Thais mentioned, one of the key factors in order to promote investments is a clear legal framework. And regarding technology, it is also important to have something like that. Ecuador has already taken some important steps on this area. Ecuador has recently approved a data protection regulation. This is a key factor right now following European trend and worldwide trends in order to protect the data privacy. People has recognized on technology the need and the useful of this, but also the responsibility of being used in a proper way. So privacy and security are two factors that are key in order to be internationally acceptable, let's say, for investments and to promote the international flow of data. And why is important international flow of data? It's important because it gives you access to international businesses, gives you access to international services like cloud services that also comprises artificial intelligence, and all of the things that I was mentioning at the beginning of the conversation that definitely will impact greatly companies and the government itself for the development of the economy. Following of this, there are some specific areas in which there could be a very close impact, very fast impact in the short period of time. We could talk about also other initiatives, but let's say for beginning, e-government. E-government is the possibility to transform or digitally transform the government in order to be able to provide public services online. But not only that, it's important to have an open data policy, an open data that would allow the government, but also the private companies to use Internet of Things, to be able to connect to the data, to the public data, in order to see how is crime going, how is transit going, how are maybe the environmental conditions going, in order to be able to leverage that for private and public activities. At the same time, we have been pursuing or trying to help in the region and worldwide with economic recovery. And how we are doing this? We have seen that pandemic had two very important effects. The first effect is that affecting the economy, in generally speaking, has also affected the different job positions. There has been a lot of job elimination, unfortunately, and at the same time, there has been a lot of digitally transform of job positions in a pace that we haven't seen before. Because of that, from Microsoft, we have a compromise from last year, the option or the possibility to put freely open to the open public and skilling initiative in order to provide skilling capacities to people, to persons looking for jobs. gives also information regarding data of each government on where are the jobs with higher demand in order to help people to get low-cost certifications and be able to reconnect with the job market in a way where probably won't be like it was before, because it already has been technically transformed, so people needs to transform itself also to get new positions. Together with that, and in order to leverage these advantages, there is also another factor that needs to be considered, which is connectivity. Connectivity is also a challenge in our region. We have, as Michelle mentioned before, we have a great geography, a beautiful country, but at the same time, it gives you also a very complex geography in order to set up connectivity networks if we are thinking on the traditional way. So because of that, we're promoting and looking for new ways to provide connectivity. And one very interesting one that we would love to see deployed in Ecuador is TV white spaces. TV white spaces is a technology that takes the advantage of the open TV signal waves in order to transmit last mile connectivity of internet with very, very good results in terms of length range, and also in terms of high output of connectivity, giving the possibility of having education, health, and other activities that right now are key and can be developed through internet in more, let's say, not connected or far away places of the country. Together with that, something that technology needs also to consider is to benefit all the people. And to benefit all the people, accessibility is a key factor that needs to be included in the design itself of the technology. The idea here is to update all the international standards that currently are. Accessibility has been a key priority for the Ecuadorian government, and we think needs to keep on being that way in order to develop products and services that allow people with disabilities to develop themselves, their capacities by themselves. It's not the idea to need to have a person helping other people, is to giving tools to all the people in any conditions for them to be able to grow and develop themselves professionally and personally. And together with all of that, there is also an interesting challenge for us as lawyers, which is the digital transformation of the legal industry. And there I can give a little of a personal history probably here. When I was working in a law firm as a, let's call it, traditional lawyer, already involved in tech matters and issues in the day-to-day practice, but the transformational experience that I have coming to work to a tech company already in an environment full of engineers and people really techie, and how that is a very nice professional challenge, but a challenge for us coming probably from a more traditional profession. And there comes artificial intelligence also for the legal work, and there comes also artificial intelligence and all the ethics issues that could come along that topic, and that we could talk a little bit later if we still have some time.
Excellent, Hector. Thank you very much. I mean, in that sense, are you suggesting that sort of Ecuador, now it has the data privacy legislation, is ready to move forward technologically, or what about sort of more sophisticated legislation around of cybersecurity, so that business is then facilitated Obviously, Ecuador has a small, but I think probably relevant sort of tech or some tech developments. I mean, obviously there is Kushki, the payments platform, a far smaller Cryptos, which is a cybersecurity platform. The country has even had a sort of tech seed fund since 2016. But legislation needs to come into place. Is it just cybersecurity legislation, or are there other steps? And then perhaps I can pass over to you, Bernardo, because I'm sure you have some points on what Hector has said.
Do you want to follow on that, Bernardo? I can give you a little bit of my perspective, Tim.
Please.
As we were talking about, privacy legislation has been just enacted, and this is a process. I think it's a positive process or a positive first step taken. Now, industry needs to get used to this new regulation and these new ways of doing businesses. Is not is not that it will affect negatively in business. I think on the contrary, it is very positive to have this new regulation. But as any new regulation, some steps needs to be taken in order to adapt to this new way of let's say, doing business. And on that sense, the legislation itself sets up a process in order to be acquainted with that. Following on that, there are already some regulations regarding cybersecurity, and it is important to have clear guidelines regarding cybersecurity. There is important to have also some regulation regarding ethics and strategies regarding artificial intelligence. But on any area of law related to technology, I think lawyers need to be very careful. First of all, because we have already international standards set it up on different regulations. And it's important to get into the community and not depart from the community, probably with good intentions in order to regulate technology. So we need to be very careful and looking into international community when we are adopting any kind of regulation, being that for artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, or data privacy. And the other factor that needs to be, or in which lawyers needs to be very careful, is not to get to over-regulation. We are, as lawyers, we have been formed to develop laws. We love interpreting of laws, but usually technology moves really way faster than the regulations or legislations that could try to keep the pace. So if we began to try to have regulated any detail, any specifics of all the technologies that there are already in the market, and not the general principles that need to be applied to how we do business regarding technology, we are going to be always a path backwards. And at the end of the day, regulations could also prevent the development of technology instead of promoting the adoption of technology.
Thank you very much, Hector. Thank you. Bernardo, would you like to come in on any of those points? Otherwise, I would like to turn.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, certainly. You know, I am one of those guys who believe that from an investment perspective and from promoting free markets, we need less laws and more freedom. And I would take on that point that Hector just made, and I agree with him. We need to be careful with this ask for regulatory certainty. Sometimes more regulations stand in the way of innovation. At the unprecedented pace that technological development is taking place, you know, you have patents that go obsolete before they are even considered by the Patent and Trademark Office in the US. You have vaccines that are coming into market in 6 months. Those pharmaceutical innovations took years to develop in the pipeline before going to the market. So regulation is something that stands in the way. The other brief point I wanted to make is, you know, again, we can come up with the typical investor perspective, which is, you know, having your Christmas wish list and present that to the government. And certainly we require legal stability, legal certainty, rule of law, and Thais, you know, describe that perfectly. So I won't add to that. But the fact of the matter, the reality right now is that that will not happen overnight, and that's going to be somewhat difficult to achieve. This administration has taken concrete steps. One of those was adhering again to the International Center for Investment Dispute Resolutions. Thais already mentioned that, and has given very concrete and specific signs of going in the right direction, such as reinstating some of the bilateral investment agreements that are in place, and a number of other things. But we need to be honest. We have a constitutional framework that was enacted in 2008 that is not the best constitutional framework for investment. It has a lot of hurdles and mines, landmines, so to speak. And the current administration is going to have to do a number of things before that can be amended. So I think we need to live for the time being with things the way they are. We were talking about technology and the intellectual property law that was enacted in Ecuador in 2014. I guess it was it's one of the worst IP laws ever. You know, we had a world-class IP law enacted in 1998, and that was unfortunately abrogated. So it is going to take some time to do all the fixing, all the legal fixing that the legal order in Ecuador needs. And so again, my point is, we need to, as investors, look again on what we can do, not what we should ask the government to do. I think the government is as good as it gets. It's doing the right things. It has a very clear idea, a very clear path forward. It has started taking measures from day one. You know, the measures taken the very first day of President Lasso being in office already gave a very strong signal, in addition to his inauguration speech. But again, it is not going to be ideal, and we will have to deal as investors or as counsel for the investment community with the system as it is. And as Michelle was saying, this is a bet. If we're gonna wait until everything is fixed and becomes ideal, you know, we're gonna miss the train. And I would like to, you know, again turn the floor to you, Tim, and continue with the conversation by giving an example. We have a strong mining practice in our firm, and I always ask my clients, how do you perceive Ecuador political risks from a political risk perspective? And I know that mining investment has quite a different profile than tech investment, for instance. But they would say, you know, the investment frontiers in the world are less and less every year. Investing in Canada, which is a very safe investment jurisdiction for mining, is becoming more and more difficult by the day because of a lot of, you know, environmental regulations and constraints. There is land that has been already concessioned, and the jurisdictions out there to invest are, you know, third world dictatorships. So in terms of that, Ecuador, with its geographical location, the infrastructure it already has, there are some challenges in infrastructure, and I'm not going to deny it. But Ecuador has a lot of infrastructure, has power. Again, investment in renewables, it's a must and one of the priorities. But still, if you compare Ecuador on a regional or even a world basis, you would get from the investor's mouth this very surprising comment. You know, if you compare with the opportunities out there in the world, Ecuador it's a good one. And that was before this administration and the changes this administration is taking.
Thank you, Bernardo. It's very interesting that you've raised the subject of mining, and perhaps we can just touch on that before we look at the very sector that you've mentioned, renewables, which I think is a key investment sector for sort of mid to upper scale investment opportunities in the country. But we have a question that's just come in from Ms. Monica Ospina, who asks the following. Ecuador has a strong force around anti-mining activism that has important representation in the Assembly or Congress. How do you foresee the new government supporting the private sector to navigate these challenges imposed by anti-mining groups and the pressure in the Congressional Assembly itself, while at the same time working towards attracting FDI? I don't know which of you to address that question to, Bernardo or Michelle, if you have experience of trying to deal with problematic or socially opposed business activities because of certain cliques in Congress. Anybody, any feedback or responses to that question, please?
If you want, I'll start, and I think Bernardo can answer better, but just I'll be a little bit more conceptual on this. I think this is the reality of the world. And I think that in the whole world, we have to become more conscious about so many things, starting number one with the environment. The mining that has existed in Ecuador has not been big mining with until recently. We have two big mines today. One of them does it very well. The other one does it poorly. One of the biggest challenges that mining companies have is they need to sell their practices. It frustrates me because I've spoken to a lot of them, and I've visited different mines, and you could see some mines that work incredibly well. But the area that they intervene after they leave has been replanted, has had a whole conscientious strategy about taking care of the people that are around it, taking care of the environment, and doing the things right. But one of the things mining companies need to do, and I need to emphasize this, they need to say what they do right. Because one of the problems that we have with mining companies is that they're quite like if they would be doing everything wrong. And of course, then you have radical groups that, for their cosmovision, as they define it, do not believe in mining until they realize that they need, and so it's fine for them to do illegal mining or small scale mining, which does much more harm to the environment. But nobody has taken the time to really explain it to them. So I think one of the big challenges that mining companies have to do in Ecuador and in the whole world and South America, where there's immense reserves of especially copper, gold, and silver, is they need to say what they do right. And when people understand what they do right, countries like Ecuador that have high debt and have immense amount of poverty need mining for the welfare of the development of the people, of education, of nutrition, and of issues that are really life and death situation. And it's very easy to say I oppose it while you have millions of people not being able to progress in their life.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It reminds me of the way this was phrased, this very argument in Argentina, which was put forward as Mercurio or Malbec, suggesting that there was a natural dichotomy between sort of cultural wealth of famous Argentine wines such as Malbec, or the use of mercury for mining, which is obviously quite frequently used in the extraction of gold. The dichotomy obviously is false, and I think that is precisely where those explanations that you're mentioning need to come in. Bernardo, did you have anything you wanted to add there, please?
Yeah, I totally support Michelle's view. We need stakeholder engagement and communication. We have discussed a lot, and we share the same view on this. And yeah, mining companies are remiss and have failed to educate and promote awareness of their best practices and what is really the environmental footprint of mining. So that's a homework that mining companies should do, and it's critical. Sound stakeholder engagement and corporate social responsibility programs. That's one thing. The other, very short comment is that in reality, people in the communities are supporting mining because they are starting to see the benefits of job creation and community development. And I can tell this not just by a conceptual approach to this, but specifically, we have had cases in Ecuador, specifically public consultation challenges at the Constitutional Court. And I think there is someone talking. We have had public consultation challenges in the Constitutional Court. And you won't believe the kind of support that the companies have received from the communities that are around the area. So I would say people sitting in an office, especially in a public office in Quito, in the capital, or in Congress, or in the media even, they have a very distorted view of what's going on actually in the field. But if you go to the field, you will realize that there is no such thing as an anti-mining movement in the region. It's just a political game, and just the same way that we faced environmental activism 20 years ago against oil, behind that was a leftist agenda. And the same happened today with mining. We just have to, rip off the mask of that and expose these people for what they really are on the one side. But yet, again, as Michelle pointed out, we need sound stakeholder engagement and best practices, because certainly if done improperly, there's going to be a lot of environmental damage. And environmental damage is actually happening because of illegal exploitation. And the only antidote to that is legal mining, responsible investors that come in the country. Otherwise, if you don't allow those responsible investors to come into the country, what's going to happen is that the narco-terrorism and the money launderers are going to take hold of those places. That's going to be the reality. So people need to understand and stop dreaming the Greta Thunberg speech. If we don't allow responsible investors to come and do mining, somebody else is going to do it, and not in a responsible manner.
Perhaps gaining some of this information as to what is going right with the mining industry in Ecuador, and specifically about community feeling and attitudes towards it, is precisely one of these areas where the private sector can bring information to Congress and facilitate and educate to begin to sort of deflate that false anti-mining rump thought that there is in Congress, if that is a key problem. But before we move fully onto a question and answers, I do want to go back to Thijs, if I may, because we didn't have an opportunity earlier for me to ask you what, given that there is this interest from the investment community in Ecuador, possibly heightened by the sort of political makeup of the continent as a whole currently, which are the sectors in which you really see there as being possibility at a financial size and weight that would begin to make a difference to the country? One of them, obviously, I think Bernardo has already mentioned in passing, which would be renewables. Do you have any take on that, please, Thijs?
Sure. No, I agree. I think renewables is one of those sectors that is attracting a lot of interest from the investment community. Number one, because the country holds high hydropower capacity and continues to build new hydro plants. And in addition, the government, even the former administration, has expanded support for other low carbon energy sources. So these efforts have fueled hope among international investors, particularly energy players that are keen to capitalize on Ecuador solar and wind potential. And actually, a significant chunk of the work that we're doing as a firm these days in Ecuador involves renewables. And I think that renewables is a good example of something that Bernardo and Michelle alluded to, which is stakeholder engagement, which is critical, right? Structural changes take time, but it's really, really, really important to take concrete steps to foster investment. And the previous administration ran a public consultation back in 2019 and 20 for the auctions of two wind projects, Villonaco 2 and 3. Those were awarded to Cobra, and then a solar project called El Aromo that was awarded to Solar Pack. And they invited market participants to provide comments on the contractual framework. We were part of that process. And overall, I believe that the consultation process, because of the stakeholder engagement, so you had different market players participating in that, was very constructive and resulted in a significant improvements to the original contractual framework. The former administration did take some, not all, of the comments and suggestions that were made by participants like ourselves, but that whole process did result in significant improvements. And just to give a few examples of how positive a process like this and stakeholder engagement can be, in the framework, there is a requirement to deliver a minimum amount of energy annually. And the contracts now have a deemed delivery construct to account for circumstances in which energy is not dispatched due to force majeure, which is key as remuneration is tied to energy delivery, the take and pay model. And also because the contract penalized generators that do not meet the minimum delivery requirements subject to a make-up period or periodo de recupero. The government also revisited the penalties regime in case of delays in reaching certain project construction or pre-COD milestones. So the contracts now reflect a more balanced approach in which the severity of the penalty is proportional to the milestone in question. So going back to a point that my fellow panelists mentioned earlier, there needs to be a balance between risk and return. And those are the positives, but I do believe that an important progress has been made. But if the country really want to foster investment in renewables, further changes to the framework are advisable to ensure that the projects that are already in the pipeline and the future ones are bankable, and also that future auctions attract even more interest from investors and competition. So I don't want to get too technical, but just to give a few examples of issues that we hope the new administration will be amenable to address or to discuss in the context of renewables. Number one, we expect to see further improvements in relief and remedies that the generator has in the event government authorities or the SELEC fail to comply with their obligations. So for example, what happens if there are delays or failure in issuing permits or certifications or issues in connection with implementation or availability of interconnection infrastructure by SELEC. I think that compensation in case of early termination in the event of default by the generator also needs some fine tuning. And I think that the other question mark we have around creditors stepping rights, that also needs to be further developed. And there may be different solutions to that, maybe a direct agreement between lenders and grantors, as we've seen in a few other projects in other sectors in the past, both in the mining sector and in infrastructure. But those are some of the issues that we expect to be able to continue discussing with the new administration. And these are just some examples. There are plenty more. So the tax benefits that I mentioned earlier, the stimulus package, all that are very important milestones for the country to continue attracting investment in the renewables space.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I just had a question and it appears to have disappeared from my screen. So if you will bear with me. Rocio, I saw you nodding at some of Theis's points. I've got a question here.
All of the above.
The neobanking, but before we turn to that, perhaps I could just ask you to sort of respond to the framework and observations that Theis has made around the renewables sector.
As you mentioned, Tim, I have an echo there. Well, as you mentioned, Tim, renewables is one of the sectors that could generate, high impact in the short term in terms of attracting investments. Is something that our clients globally are looking to, invest more and including to their portfolio of investments. As Thais mentioned, there are certain, specifics that need to be addressed in terms of, regulatory framework to make the projects bankable, and bankable at a competitive price. Because when Thais mentions bankable, I do think that she refers to make it competitive, right? To bring the international banks to be a part of this and be able to contribute to the process in a constructive way. Having said that, and recognizing that as Thais and Bernardo were mentioning earlier, complete transformation of regulatory framework takes time. There are intermediary solutions that one could look into to make sure that these projects get off the ground at competitive bankable prices with the right kind of investors. And this would include, political risk insurance. This is something that it's an instrument that it's out there that you can get from multilaterals that are amenable to the risk of Ecuador, from insurance companies, and that would make the counterparty risk of the government in the project more amenable to investors and to banks looking to participate. So these are kind of things, involving multilaterals in this process usually, helps countries that, as Ecuador, are transforming their model to attract investments in the time it takes to get to, as Bernardo said, the Santa wish list, right? But there are risks that can be taken at the appropriate returns, and there are mitigants that you can use that are out there in the financial market to ensure that this is something that that works not 4 years from now, but this year and the next. So solutions are out there that can mitigate those risks, but those risks are there. Are at least the investor base that we interact with are conscious of these risks and are willing to get into discussions about what is the plan. Is there a forward-looking plan to transform the framework? Is there a forward-looking plan to make sure that in the life cycle of our investment this will happen, and they will be willing to take that risk? But again, there has to be a conversation around this, and there is appetite, to wait and to work with the government into a transition. But honest, open discussions of risks and returns have to be had. That's what I was nodding, because these are the same conversations that we are having, and we are trying to make sure that these points are taken into consideration. Not only by the administration, but also, by partner banks that could have interest into, becoming more present and more prevalent in the local market.
Thank you very much, Rocio. And following immediately on to that discussion of the banks themselves, I have a question here from Senor Sebastian Turan that I'd like to open to Hector and Rocio before coming to you, Michelle, with a question. The first question is this: the banking laws are still antiquated in Ecuador, and there's been no advance on how to develop a digital or neobank. How should it work and under current laws, given that they only apply to brick and mortar banks, making it difficult to change the banking system? How do you think that the new government should adapt this law, and how would that help to bring new investments, if it would?
So first, I get these questions a lot because you see what's happening on the fintech environment in Mexico, in Brazil. And people are always asking, what's going on in Ecuador. So, a little going a little bit back on this question, the first thing that we need to answer is, what problem are we trying to solve, right? What need is not being addressed? Once you have that clear, then you can see that usually innovation on the banking sphere, it begins on the edges, right? And there you do not have regulation, and when I mean on the edges, you can talk about, what Kushki is doing on the payment space. Those kind of innovations do not need a change in regulatory framework, and there's a lot of space to do that, right? We need to digitize banking, and that can be done using the current, the current solutions that are in place. So again, we need to be curious to understand what is the need that it's not being solved, and there are plenty of opportunities to solve issues on the edges without, major changes in regulation. If we want to go to digital banks, yes, we need to be mindful that current regulatory framework, not on the payment side, not on the transactional side, not on the deposit side, but on the credit side, would make it not interesting for investors to come in, because you have ceilings on interest rates, and usually when you go and lend to to different types of to people that are not that bank, now the risk is higher, right? So the interest rate that needs to be charged for a higher risk needs to be higher, and that's not captured within the current regulatory framework. That's something that needs to eventually change. But again, the point that I would like to emphasize is that there's plenty of opportunity within the current regulatory framework to solve issues that are not being solved, that could bring innovation on the edges, mostly on the payment side, mostly on the digital banking side. And what the government needs to work on is to ensure that the long-term prospects of banking, be it digital or brick and mortar, are related to what you can see on the international market. Regulatory framework more adherent to Basel, for example, to Basel III. It's something that it's important. If you want to attract banking investors into the country, they will need to make an appropriate return on the capital that they bring here. So for that, you need to have return on capital, return on risk-weighted assets methodologies implemented. That's something that not the government, but the Superintendencia de Bancos, our banking regulator, is working on to ensure that this is interesting and appealing in the long term. So digital is a solution for a lot of problems that we have here, and not necessarily, we need to go and change a lot of stuff to make it work and make it attractive.
Thank you, Rocio. Hector, would you have anything you'd like to add there?
Just following of what Rocio mentioned, and that we were talking previously, and it's a key point here also regarding laws and technology. We don't want to wait to have everything regulated. We don't want, or we not necessarily need to have everything regulated on detail, because that, as I mentioned at the beginning, could be a negative effect instead of fostering investments. Currently, regulations and bank regulations, specifically in Ecuador, allows the use of cloud services. There is also a regulation for digital signatures in Ecuador, so the combination of both could be very useful in order to develop online banking, and probably not 100%, but it is the way towards having really electronic banking. Probably some details need to be worked, but many times it's more a thing of application of the current regulation and the technologies in order to get used to it as a bank, as the client, and also as the regulator, because at the end of the day, all of us, the three pillars here, are learning how to transform, to digitally transform. But we have seen a very positive attitude on this way from the regulator.
Thank you very much, Hector. The questions are flooding in, so if I don't come back to you on that point, I will circle back to you, Hector. But I'd like to bring Michelle and Bernardo back into the conversation with an interesting question that takes us in a slightly different direction. Do either of you have any idea what the position of the new administration is in relation to tourism and hospitality? Michelle, I know earlier on you mentioned something along the lines of sort of ecotourism, to make the greatest opportunity out of the topography and diversity that the country has. Has there been any sort of impulse or talk of that particular segment, the tourism and hospitality industry, amongst the new administration?
Sorry, didn't put my mute off.
Thank you.
Yes, very specifically, and I just wanted to add something that Rocio said. One of the goals that Mr. Lasso said previous to winning the election and after he won the election is that he wants to sell Banco del Pacifico and to bring new banks into Ecuador and stimulate competition and reduce interest rates. So just for everybody's information, that I think it's a very positive message in that sense. And regarding tourism, there is going to be a proposal, I imagine that it will go through Congress to give 12 years tax, zero taxes for any tourism investment. And the opportunities are incredible because it's not only the fact that the biodiversity of Ecuador is incredible, our cuisine is exquisite and different. We have some of the best fruits and vegetables that you can really have anywhere in the world. I know I'm sounding patriotic, but it's really true. But being a small country, it allows to be very accessible most everywhere. And one of the good things that the Correa government did, probably at a very high price, but it was probably one of the better things they did, is that we have some of the best road systems in most of South America. So there's incredible opportunities here to do tourism, ecotourism, cultural tourism. I mean, I've been changing some pictures. I'm going to change now a picture to the background that I took in downtown Quito. For the ones that don't know this, Quito was the first city declared by the United Nations Patrimony of Humanity. So there's all types of tourism around Ecuador.
Thank you.
And I will put a picture up.
Thank you. The questions keep flooding in. Thijs, if you have time, perhaps I can put a couple to you before circulating some others. First and foremost, Thijs, how do you perceive the reforms recently made to private-public partnership regulation? Is it better to have a stronger law there? And secondly, is it feasible to think about large investments from international firms on concessions, or do we have to wait for the market to perceive the structural change the new government is making? Are investors willing to take currency risk, but not political risk? And how should we measure rule of law between countries in the region?
Okay, so
sorry, there's a handful there for you.
Yeah, I'll try to address all of them, but starting with the first one, so PPP. I believe the Ecuadorian Congress passed the PPP law back in 2015, and definitely it was a significant improvement. It's a framework that established certain guidelines and incentives for projects to be structured in the form of PPPs with an institutional framework. So I think that helps. And even in the former administration, I believe they created a task force with different members of different ministries to study projects and their viability. So there are certainly talks about PPPs for projects in strategic sectors, which is great. So I do believe that having a framework is better than not having a framework. And potentially there will be opportunities involving strategic sectors and public services that are currently managed by the government or autonomous regional governments. To give a few examples, public infrastructure, urban development, public transportation, or real estate. My understanding is that the agenda, at least for PPP on the infra space, which I believe is also one of the questions that we got from the audience, is less advanced than what we're seeing in renewables, where there is a clear plan and pipeline upcoming, but maybe my colleagues can talk about that. And then the second question about feasibility, are investors going to wait and see? It depends on the investor, it depends on the sector, and it depends on the project, right? It's always a matter of balancing risk and return, and maybe the ones that have more appetite for risk are gonna get better returns. I do believe that obviously the more track record you have, the more competition a country are going to attract, but there's also benefits in being, a first time in investors. And in the renewable space, we already saw a lot of, for example, European companies very much interested in participating in those auctions. I guess what happens with, we had the Yonaco 1, and that project has already been operating for about 7 years. That opened doors to new ones. What happens on the financing of the Yonaco 2 and 3, and also El Aromo may open the door for more projects in the future. And sorry, I can't remember the third question, if you don't mind repeating it.
Just bear with me one moment. Investors appear willing to take currency risk, but not political risk. So how should we measure rule of law between different countries in the region?
Yeah, well, certain investors are willing to take certain risks. And as Rocio mentioned, there are instruments to protect or mitigate some of those risks. She mentioned political risk insurance, which is something that we've seen being used in Ecuador and in other countries in the region. Which is helpful, again, particularly when a country is trying, for investments in that are significant and in strategic sectors. The investment agreements that I alluded to, and I think Bernardo also commented on that have been entered in some projects between the government and the investors, are also a way to mitigate certain concerns around the investments. And some people are going to find Ecuador more compelling than other countries in the region where you may have competition, but this really depends on the risk appetite and the project in question.
Excellent, Thijs, thank you. Now, I have to note that we're...
Tim?
Yes?
Just a comment. One of the first things that President Lasso did is forming a task force with the goal of deregulating, of finding out, where's the red tape, what are unnecessary steps in administrative processes. And because going back to the point of the PPP regulation, even though the goal is good and there is a framework there that on a conceptual basis seems to be attractive, the fact of the matter is that going through all the requirements and approvals and the process that it takes under the PPP, and this was reformed to some extent, but still it's a nightmare, and it's going to take you, many months or even more to actually go through the process. So I think this signal of the government that we need less regulations, that we need to avoid unnecessary steps, that we need actually to deregulate, it's also a very positive sign.
It's very interesting that
if I may just chime in on that, it depends on, I guess, the concern is not really maybe deregulation, right? But making sure that there's less bureaucracy, which sometimes comes from regulation. Also, I agree with you. That's a very important steps on the PPP side.
It's not necessarily less law, but better law. Indeed. I mean, one of the questions we have is from Grant Smith, which is, how likely do we regard it that the Superintendencia de Compañías is going to remove or reduce the bureaucratic regulatory load, especially in its sort of more basic regulatory regulations. Would that be a government implemented step, or can they begin to reform those norms and regulations as an entity?
There has been progress on that. Let me just interject on this one. And actually, you can form a company, the last one that we did in 42 minutes, including everything. You have a registered company with tax ID number and ready to operate in 42 minutes. Exactly, that's what it took.
Now, I must admit that we're beginning to run out of time, ladies and gentlemen. So I'd like to cede a question, if I may, to everybody for the end. And that is a very simple question from Ms. Gutierrez, who says, in 4 years' time, how would you judge this administration's success? What are the sort of markers that you would use? But before we turn to that, I'll just leave you thinking of that. Hector, perhaps I can ask a final question of you. There are a lot of stigmas, fear regarding sharing data, even in compliance with something like GDPR. And in order to evolve as a country, we need digitalized data. For sure, the new privacy law is the first step, but what are the next steps? What can the privacy industry do to become enablers in this matter?
Thanks, Tim. This is a very, very important question. And from our point of view, I think the key matter here is transparency. It is important, as I mentioned at the beginning, strong international standards of privacy and security. The person making the question mentions GDPR, which is very important here. There are also ISO standards for security of handling data and the cloud, but all of that needs to be under a blanket of transparency. Companies need to understand that the data is from the people, is from the clients. The clients need to have 100% control of their data all the time, needs to know where is his data located, even though it could be called the cloud, but the cloud at the end of the day are data centers physically located somewhere in the world. So I think transparency in that regard is key. And together with that, very strong security practices. As I like to mention, when we talk to bank clients, the process of converting or having your earnings not on your house or in your company, but on the banks, is because the banks are the specialists in order to keep secure your money. In this case, the technology, the big technology service providers are the specialists in order to take care of your data, for you to be able to get into your own specialty and activities. So I think those are the key pillars that needs to be, I think, evangelized from the companies. But the key pillar in all of this is transparency.
Thank you very much indeed, Hector. So perhaps to wrap up, I can just, we can go around participants and ask you for any sort of final summing up observations or conclusions, and your own answer to that brief question I posed earlier as to, what would be the marks of a successful administration 4 years down the line? I leave it open to you, whoever would like to come back on that first.
Tim, well,
Hector.
maybe I'll take advantage that I had it already, the mic open. I would like to see in 4 years Ecuador open, and Ecuador probably digitalized, transformed digitally speaking, but not because of the sake of having technology or using technology, but for the sake of giving the people, the customers, the possibility to have better services, to have better information, to have a better economy. and definitely having more international investments in order to have a bigger and, at the end of the day, a happiest country.
Thank you very much. Any further takers? Michelle?
I can follow that.
Rocio.
No,
Have to be
so,
fast in this business, it would appear. The tech specialists are the quickest to answer.
now Hector had the mic open, so that's an advantage in this Zoom reality that we're living. But parting thoughts, something that I wanted to mention is we are not only a bank, we are an investor that has been here for 61 years. And we can see from the ground the opportunities. Sure, there are things that need to be done, but this is the land of opportunities. So if we in such a regulated industry with such high standards, being an international bank, not an international bank, a US bank, can find our way here, I'm sure that there are plenty of other investors that, given the good winds and the way that the stars are aligning, can find their way here as well. So that's something that I wanted to give as a parting reflection, right? So we've been here 61 years. We've seen ups and downs in the country, and still we plan to be here for as long as there are opportunities and our clients are operating here in this market. So that's an important message that we wanted to share with the audience. As I said, not as a bank, but as a foreign investor that has been working here for as long as we have. So, and in terms of how do we measure success for this administration, I think that they have, designed their own scorecard. So we need to measure them against, what they have set out to do. As President Lasso says, he wants to see more world in Ecuador and more Ecuador in the world. So one measure of that would be the insertion of Ecuador into the Pacific Alliance, the signing of a successful signing of an agreement with the US, and opening the markets, as some of my co-panelists have mentioned. So I think that's something that we need to follow close, very, very, we need to follow very closely. The improvement of Ecuador in the ranking of doing business as evaluated by the World Bank and other institutions. We need to come up from where we are right now. So being closer to the top 20, I would say it's an attainable, goal in the 4 years that this administration has. Being a banker, I would like to see Ecuador closer to investment grade. So that's a process, right? We cannot be, we are not here to be wishful dreamers, but they have to start the process to get the country closer to investment grade, to make sure that financing for the government comes on cheaper and, from more diverse sources than the multilaterals, these days. So I would say that, and again, let's follow closely the scorecard that the government has set for themselves. They need to ensure governability. The executives have shown a lot of empathy to work, with the different stakeholders in the assembly. So that's something that we need to follow closely as well. And really, having Ecuador occupy its rightful position as a magnet for investments in the world. That's something that I would personally would like to see.
If I may add to Rocio and continue her thought and a little bit in a more philosophical and not so specific, but as a dreamer, I just with lines that or phrases that I think every country strives for, that we need to strengthen democracy. We started in the previous government. We had a transparent election, and which really is the first step built going forward. Stronger institutions with better governability and transparency and security in terms of law, diminish corruption, level the playing field to give opportunity to everybody in the country, not just the ones that have, but also the ones that don't have, which goes together with better education, strengthen the family values and stronger families. And just as a general, a country empowered by its people, resources, and unique reality.
Thank you very much, Michel. It's a very fine canister of thoughts and observations that we would all like to see come true within a space of 4 years. Well, perhaps we should consider reconvening this meeting in 2 years' time so that we can do a check on how steps forward are proceeding. I'd like to thank all our participants. I would like to give special thanks.
Tim, I think we're missing Ty's final remarks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I would like to close, please.
I'm sorry, Thijs. Did you have some final remarks? My apologies.
No, look, so just building on what Michel and Rocio said, I think there are good wins, and I hope that in 4 year time, we're going to see those good wins transform into good wins, right? So we need the government to take concrete steps, and we need to see projects, being built, being financed, creating jobs. I think that's going to be a major transformation.
Thank you very much, Thijs. Now, I want to be sure that I haven't curtailed anybody else. Bernardo, did you have any final comments for us, please?
Yeah, thanking everyone, because I think this has been a very thought-provoking and insightful panel with diverse perspectives on the various discussion points. So I thank you all for the high caliber of this. And just a couple of notes, final notes. One is, yet we need to look into the immediate term, because we need to attract investment, and we cannot wait for years for that to happen. And certainly mining, renewables, connectivity, infrastructure are things that can be recipients of high-scale investments. That's one thing. But at the same time, I would like to note that an iPhone 5 or 6 that costs in the market probably $50 has more computational power than a supercomputer in 1982 that costs at the time $32 million. And my point is that the street guy, the regular guy, has that power now. Technologies and new technologies specifically by design are empowering the street guy and are making accessible to the street guy a lot of benefits of technology. So technology is a huge democratizing factor that can level the playing field. And so I do insist that Ecuador and the business community need to look in the medium and long term to position itself to surf the way in terms of exponential growth and new technologies. Because that's where the real power, economical power in the future is going to lie. It's not going to lie in oil. It's not going to lie in resources. It's not going to lie in energy. It's going to lie in intangible technologies. And having said that, to the question that someone posed, I am not concerned about the success of the administration in 4 years. I am much more concerned about the success of the business elites and leaders, because we have a role to play, and we need to play that role. This is a time where we need to stop asking things from the government. The government is already good enough, and ask ourselves, what is it that we need to do in order to make the benefits of this historical time window and growth opportunity be felt by all the segments in society, starting by policies in our own companies. With that, I thank you again, team. Wonderful panel, and look forward to keep the discussion ongoing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. And yes, thank you to all our panelists, to everybody who has been involved and listening in today. Thank you for those of you who sent in questions. I think we've come to certain takeaways, which for Ecuador to move forward, then development has to be inclusive, that tech has to function as a democratizing factor that strengthens institutions as it moves forward, be they educational, be they health, be they political. And perhaps we can look forward to some sort of Techequador there that combines the best of a technological jurisdiction such as Hong Kong or Singapore with the best of the environmental advantages of a Costa Rica. Let's think about doing this again in a couple of years, seeing how progress is making and seeing if we can put some more important discussion before a very interested and sizable community that has joined us today. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to have been the opportunity to moderate this discussion. My best regards to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Please stay safe and healthy.
Yes, you too, Rocio. I look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you very much, Hector. We've barely scratched all the conversations, the surface of the conversations that you could bring to us. We have to revisit the Ecuadorian school that you mentioned you'd been working with. But my thanks nonetheless. We will get there in time. Thais, thank you very much. Rocio, a great pleasure. My best regards to all of you.
Very much, Tim.
Thank
Very
you.
happy to
Bye.
be here. Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.